Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And well, we're getting some first tidbits of information on what CCP is working on for the January release, such as some changes to the agency window. It's still pretty shy on the long-term roadmap, so I'm still very hungry for any information on CCP's plans for 2018 when it comes to EVE Online. Of course, we are here for the market, so let's get started for this Christmas period here. As always, we are going to start with plex and stuff, and that's going to be at 40 seconds. There we go. And plex are flattening out a little bit at the tail end after a nice bump early September, at the end of November. We are now pretty much flat, but it is in GTA itself at an expensive price of 3.4 million ISK, which makes for a very expensive 30 days game time, of course. If we go to the player-owned trade hubs, this is very surprising to me. You can see here we're talking 3,400 and here we're talking 3,335, so 3,335,000 ISK, a very narrow margin between the sellers in the player-owned trade hubs and GTA itself. It's normally a little bit bigger than that, and I guess that this is basically the reaction that you're seeing when the price is flattening out. These sellers are slightly going up in price, but GTA is staying flatter. I think that that's basically what's happening there. That margin is closing up a little bit. The buyers of these plexes are now at 3.3 million ISK, so people are willing to pay well over 1.5 billion ISK in order to fund 30 days game time, or of course to invest in plex themselves. So flat here. Okay, it's gonna be quite interesting, I think, to see what happens after the holidays. Right now you could have some effects from plex sales and from CCP sales on all of these kinds of products, including skins and all of that good stuff. But after the holidays, I think that is where we could go either way, depending a little bit on how the arms race is being received in the game. So we could be back on an inflationary pattern, which I think there is a good chance that we'll see. That CCP is still doing more and more stuff when it comes to things that you can do and purchase with plex. Skins, you know, they keep coming out with new skins. If in game you have any interest in those, you're just going to have amassed some plex and you're gonna spend those, then increasing demand again. Of course, the injectors and all of that stuff, if there's any route that CCP will go, it should always have this impact of we need more plex and thus increasing demand for those. Supply wise, well, it's really only sales that increase supply to the point where prices are going down at the moment. And the name of the game when it comes to ISK in EVE Online itself is of course inflation. So my money is on prices continuing to go up after the holidays, where here during the holidays we might indeed see a bit of hesitation because of sales, special actions and things like that. But the opposite is also possible, but that would be probably a bad sign for the game itself. It would mean that demand would drop suddenly for the player base in general, which would mean lower activity. So at this point, it's going to be very interesting to see what plex are doing. But we are definitely ending the year here at a pretty high note, close to 3.4 million ISK. The multiple pilot training certificate, this one I think is yo-yoing a little bit because of those CCP actions here. With a dive down to 1.3 billion ISK. We're actually going to end the year very close to that apparently as well, selling for 1,350,000,000 ISK bars, 1,250,000,000. And you can tell here from the average price that sometimes it's the sellers that win out, sometimes it's the buyers that win out. So someone that's a little bit lazy is willing to say, okay, there you go, 1,250,000,000. And it's sold. That way I've got that done if I need that ISK right away. And some other people, they might just you know, just straight up sell those or pick those up saying I need one of those right now, I'm going to pay 1.3 billion ISK for that one. The bad news is this looks like it's potentially a very good chart to do some trades on, right? Going from 1.3 to 1.5 billion ISK is not so bad several times in the last few months, but it's the volumes that are the problem, of course. With like just a couple dozen being traded every day, volumes have managed to go up. That is true on these lower prices, but it's very difficult to actually make any real money on this. You need, I think, a lot of patience and to stay with maybe individual ones. So on very low points like now, you might try to pick some up at 1.25 billion and then wait for the right time to put it back on the market, try and clear it, but I don't think you're gonna do it with dozens of these training certificates. So it's gonna be a pretty competitive market if you want in on that one. The skill extractors next, of course, just like plex, because that's one of those items that you purchase directly with plex, is also flattening out at the tail end, but ending the year here at a pretty high note. I'm saying ending the year, we still have a little bit of time to go. It is only the 23rd, so we have one more EVE talk for the real end of the year stuff. Maybe we'll get shocked, but I don't expect that. 374 million ISK for the sellers, 366 for the buyers. Decently narrow margin here again. If we go to the JITA prices, 380, 381, so up by only 6-7 million. It's really not that much. It used to be a lot more, I think, and this is apparently the pattern of what's happening when we are flattening out at the tail end here. Let's take a look next at the large skill injectors, up in price just a touch, but then also flat at the tail end. These are selling for 800 million pretty much. Buyers are at almost 790 million, so again really narrow margin for the price range, and up to 820 million in JITA itself. Yeah, that's again not all that much of a premium to pay in JITA station. So 800 million for a large skill injector, slight bump up at the tail end here, but also flattening and not at the highest point of the year. That is something that is probably pretty important as well. My personal theory is that we may have lost some skill point demand and that we've definitely created a strong ceiling for skill point demand because of the daily alpha injectors that are being traded directly for plex. Next up here we've got the small skill injector. Ooh, actually taking off, doing something different. And this is a theory that if you go back a couple of weeks, I think that I have talked about, that we might see this difference between the large skill injector and the small skill injectors. Why? The large skill injectors is 800 million ISK. That is not very easy for an alpha clone to work towards. But a small skill injector that is currently being sold for 165 million ISK, and the buyers are at 172 almost. That's crazy. That doesn't work. Why is that order still there with these sell orders here? So it must be a very specific expires in 1 second. There is something wrong with that, so let's go back. Small skill inject, there we go. 165 million for the sellers, 158 million for the buyers. Decently narrow margin, but that is something that an alpha clone can work towards. A little bit of luck with exploration, or a little bit of sustained ratting or something like that, and a small skill injector is very much something that is in a budget of even an alpha clone. All they need is either a decent amount of game time or some luck, right? 165 million ISK can actually drop from a 3 or a 4 out of 10. You need to be very lucky for that, but it can actually happen. And so I think that this is a reason why we might see slightly stronger demand on the small skill injectors compared to the large skill injectors. And then finally, the daily alpha injectors are going up in price as well. 61 million for the sellers now, and the cheapest are actually in JITA station. Quite surprising. And then 55 million for the buyers. So there is strong demand for skill points, I think, especially for alpha clones as well. And this again is probably the same story, right? 800 million for a large skill injector. Could take weeks for an alpha clone to work on that, maybe even longer, maybe even more than a month. But a small skill injector for 160 million, that is actually doable. And a daily alpha injector for 60 million, that is definitely the best option. So we might actually see some interesting dynamics, but the smaller the increment the more popular it's going to be with the alpha clones. And so that is something that CCP has definitely noticed, and from the looks of it, from the increased price of the 5-day moving average on the daily alpha injectors, looks like they were right on the money, that in order to satiate demand they needed to cut the skill point boosts into smaller chunks. Very interesting stuff actually. We'll see if that trend continues as well. Next up, let's talk a little bit about minerals. I think that's gonna be very bad news in general. 10-15. The reason is titanium is continuing to go down, and that is not good news, right? Titanium has actually been the strong holder here when it reached 6 ISK. That gave me hope for pyrite, for isogen, but that never materialized. And so seeing titanium go back down like this, currently being sold for, let's take a look here, for ISK 50, the buyers are at 449. Margin is completely dead, but you still see 1.1 billion coming in, several hundred million coming in here. More supply than demand. We could actually break through this and head for a 4 to 4.5 ISK price band, which, well, at 4 ISK you are starting to play with that 1-year low once again. So very bad news. Titanium still under pressure, and I think it's gonna be the name of the game for minerals in general. So here is pyrite actually proving me wrong right off the bat, but it's still relative. So we have a little bit of a jump up from 4 ISK to almost 5 ISK. We're trying, but keep in mind this entire bubble here, or negative bubble you could say, is actually still within the 1-year low price range. So this is pretty damn crazy. 483 for the sellers of pyrite, 476 for the buyers, and here 700 million units coming in. Again, you are seeing that there is lots of supply even at these extremely low prices. So people are mining up a storm in EVE Online. Destruction is not high enough, and minerals are, well, really very, very low. Pyrite, despite the little blip up here, I would still put this at a 1-year low point. Titanium is trying to defend at 4.5, but if it breaks that, look out for 4, look out for a 1-year low price. I think it could happen very quickly then. Next up, we've got Mexalon, the one positive. It's been the positive for the entire year because of its trade range compared to any of the other minerals, historically speaking, before the mining changes here. Trying to hold on, trying to slowly maybe even get back to 70 ISK, but it's not succeeding in that. 67.45 for the sellers and 65.93 for the buyers. It is still okay. This is still, even for before Ascension, before the Rorcal being the king of mining, this was actually still an okay price for Mexalon. And so again, you know, we've been saying it the entire year, but if you're mining and you can prioritize asteroids that yield Mexalon, do so. It's gonna get you more ISK per hour for sure. Isogen tried to blip up as well, but here again you can see that we are basically playing the market forces below the entire chart at a 1-year low point. Isogen is selling for 43.87, way less than Mexalon. Mexalon this was actually the order of value, and is still, I think, the order of volume per mining volume that you're getting here. So you're getting most titanium, then most pyrite, then most Mexalon, and then most isogen from the asteroids that you can mine that yield those. And yet isogen 43.87, way lower than the Mexalon price. 41.03 for the buyers as well. So it's really showing that Mexalon is a bottleneck when it comes to the regions where most mining is happening. Yeah, 1-year low again though. Noxium, playing with it again here as well. Look at that, 383. The actual low point was even below 300 ISK, so we're not there yet, but 311 for the sellers, 299 for the buyers. Yeah, we're again playing with that range, and the bad news here again, 3 million units coming in. It's gonna take some time at least for the market to absorb that, and extremely low prices for Noxium once again. I don't see any signs that this is gonna turn around, by the way. Zydrine next, look at that, 1-year low points heading straight for 800 ISK. This should give you an idea about the source of all of this supply. I'm not saying it's one group, I'm not saying it's the Imperium, right? Although I still think that they might be so big that while their intent is not to sell to the JITA market, at some point I think that just the opportunistic I gotta jump back to Jita. What am I gonna fill my hauler with when there's really nothing else to do? Well, let's just dump some of those minerals at least on the market. And of course the other groups, the general vibe in Nozick that I'm getting at the moment is that sure, there are still conflicts here and there, but there is nothing like a massive galaxy in flames event happening, and it hasn't for some time. Everybody is stocking up, building huge fleets of capitals and supers, I think, at the moment. Basically we still have an arms race amongst the actual big groups, and who knows how that is going to play out. If you look at what's happening on the Chinese server, basically all conflict has died down there and all Nozick is in the hands of a single group. So is that a natural evolution of EVE Online? Of course everybody hopes not, because then CCP is gonna have to intervene again pretty massively, but that may just be the nature of the true sandbox at some points. It's gonna be interesting to see how all of that plays out. That still does mean that Zydrine is at 814 ISK and the buyers are also at 814, and despite that you can see still dumping happening of hundreds of thousands and even millions of units of Zydrine. 1 year low point. I myself, I need some of this Zydrine if I want to build a large structure at some point for moon mining, so I'm going to pick up some of this really cheap Zydrine in the range of what I'm going to need for that. It's really the time to do so, of course. Look at this chart, 1 year low point again. Almost all minerals are at that point except for Mexilon. Next up we've got Megasite. Same story. Obviously we broke through the 1000 ISK barrier. Very dangerous to break a psychological barrier like that, because things can go very quickly then. And Megasite is selling for 962, buyers are at 944. As I said, it can go very quickly. Buyers are going straight down to less than 950 here for that Megasite. 1 year low point again. So if you plan to produce stuff, I think that it is the right move now to actually pick some of that up, because if conflict does come back, these prices will probably go back up as well. And now we've got Morphite also playing well below the entire chart here actually. That is quite surprising. 8,300 a couple of weeks ago, 8,900 for the sellers, 8,323 for the buyers. And yet another minerals, as you can see, that is showing some upwards motion, but it's still well below the entire chart for the last year. So the mineral market in general is just being oversupplied massively, and we have extremely low prices across the board. Next up, let's take a look at PI 1730. Okay, let's go over these. Here are the broadcast nodes. So this was what we were actually expecting. This is going to normalize more and more these advanced PI materials that are needed in structures. Good news for me, because I'm still planning a large structure. We might also get a bump up when CCP decides to roll out moon mining for wormhole space and for 4.5 systems. But personally I actually think that because everything is already available, people are already preparing for that as well, and it's going to be mostly incalculated already. What is really important to note here in general, this is not something that you're seeing on this chart, but when we had the very first structures with the Citadel expansion, the bubble, the increase in price was massive, and it also took a very long time, months and months, for the price to recover and to come back to its previous averages from before the expansion. The second set of structures came out, the engineering complexes. Peaks were lower and it took less time, and here now we have the refineries. Sure, it's still a decent peak, but it's definitely lower than before as well, and the recovery, which is I think very important here, is very fast. Just 2 months in and we are basically back at the average price of around 2.1 million. So 2.2, almost 2.3 for the sellers, but 2 million for the buyers. And so if you have some patience, you can definitely pick those broadcast nodes back up at the average and normal price. I think it's a very important thing to note here. Construction blocks are basically staying around that 12k average, I think. Actually, nope, sellers 11,600, buyers 10,900. Let's say, oh, that's here. Yep, definitely a big dip here all of a sudden in construction blocks. Something to note is their demands. Nope, there's actually not really demand from anywhere else. interesting. All right, construction blocks going down. If you look at this entire chart, and you can buy them for less than 11,000 ISK. Again, a PI material under pressure. Consumer electronics next. Let's see, charts at around 11,200, sellers 12,000, buyers 10,600. So sellers around average, buyers maybe a touch below average, but you could go out either way on that. Coolants, of course, fuel related PI materials, we know that those aren't doing too well and is staying very low, 8,200 for the sellers, and just the lack of buyers is showing up very strongly here. Enriched uranium, ooh, just keeps going down here, less than 10,000 ISK now as well. 10,400 for the sellers, 9,500 for buyers, still a wide margin here. Some buyers coming in at a decent, with decent volumes as their investments, of course, seeing what's happening here, but the pressure is on. And yet again, fuel related PI materials, 1 year low points, same like the minerals. Where's all this gone to? I think if you think about it a little bit, you know that it's in the Tech 2 market, of course, which is massively overpriced compared to what was happening before the moon mining changes. Here we've got the integrity response drones, very interesting dip to 2.2 million, less than the entire chart. So here again you see that the peaks are less high, and then after the recovery in just a couple of months is a lot faster. 2.5 million almost for the sellers, 2.3 million for the buyers, around average, yeah, even at the low end of the average. Mechanical parts, so fuel related, less than 10,000 ISK, very cheap here, 8,863 for the buyers, and those are coming in 73,000 units. So there is this, I think, market segment that is actually buying these up now in expectations or as investments for the future. I don't blame them, I have some of those myself as well. Nuclear reactors is actually more related to the structure, so you've got a peak here in November, the very fast recovery, and is actually still playing with less than average prices, 91,000 for the sellers, 88,000 for the buyers. You can see the lack of demand is starting to show up in some of these, like the coolants, and here in the nuclear reactors. Nobody's actually actively buying that, so that is a good sign if you're looking to make that longer term investment. But of course, it is a reality that there is a lower fuel consumption, for instance. Robotics next, staying at around 90,000 ISK here, 86,000 for the buyers, very cheap as well. I have a small investment in that myself. Self-harmonizing power core back on the normal average. One massive purchase happening though, but sellers are at 2.2 million, buyers are at 2 million. Once again, that recovery in just 2 months is pretty amazing. Superconductors next here, 11,800 for the sellers, 11,200 for the buyers, around average, well, maybe a little bit below average actually, but you know, this is still a reasonable price, I would say. Test sculptures here also staying reasonably around 10,000 ISK here, 11,000 to 12,600 for the sellers, but 9,200 for buyers. Very wide margin here, not a massive volume spike, so some increased demand, someone came in and bought some stuff apparently. And finally, the wetware mainframes, still delaying a little bit to get back on that average of around 2.25 million, but sellers 2.4, buyers 2.3. We are obviously heading there as well after the introduction of the refinery. So the PI here again, I think the general trend is that in the fuels we are at 1 year low points, just like with the minerals, and that is because there is just a lack of demand because of the changes to moon mining, well, the advanced PI materials are coming back down very nicely to their average prices, and then for the rest, the lower stuff, you have average sellers, a little bit less than average buyers. You've got the lack of demand here and there, and yeah, it's showing that ISK is flowing to other markets at the moment. It could be an opportunity. It always remains a little bit of a gamble, of course, because you never know what the future will bring. But when it comes, for instance, to fuels, you know that if CCP does come out with more structures and more varied structures, maybe even more accessible structures, I would love to have stuff like the propaganda towers actually become something that is not about power, not about efficiency, but something that is more akin to making your space look good the way you want to. Give that many options, skins, potentially extra stuff to build around that as well. I would love to connect my existing structures around that belt with very nice stuff that makes it look like a living center where Co Incorporated is the funder of all of that activity. So I think that could be very nice, and of course make that cost some fuel. As a result, we'll have some increased demand. It's also something that they could easily switch and change the fuel costs of those types of items without impacting the rest of the economy, right? If right now they would say, well, there's too low fuel consumptions, well, engineering complexes, you know, production and research, let's double that. Well, massive impact on the entire economy. If you have a set of structures that are not tied to these services and the entire economy, but are there as an option if you want to make that space look a little bit different, then that is also something that you can use as a way to have an impact when things become problematic potentially when it comes to fuel consumption. So I think it's very interesting, and personally I am slowly buying some of that stuff, although of course right now I'm also saving up some ISK because I still need to get to work on my moon mining structure as well. Let's take a look at Tech 1 ships next. 2545, something like that. Let's go over these quickly. I think that the news will not be good. We know that CCP has already increased supply through the arms race event of many of these battleships and battle cruisers, and of course with the low minerals, all of these costs are down as well, making for normally a very cheap Tech 1 market. We also know that there is pretty low demand for all of these. So here we do have some increased volumes, but at a price of less than 130 billion. That is probably slowly going to recover back to 150, but 130 million for the sellers, 111 for the buyers. And here availability is way more than what the market can normally handle, like less than 20, sometimes even less than 10 apocalypses in a day. The Caracal dropping even lower, and this I think is the minerals showing up here. Less than 9 million ISK for a Caracal, 8.9 almost for the sellers, 8.1 for the buyers, and still 100 here, 100 here. They're still being brought to the market. I think that you can just make them so cheaply now with those low minerals that this is the price for a Caracal. Catalyst is the one that's doing something different, up to 1.75 and 1.5 million here on volume spikes though. When the quantity is at 1500 catalysts, I think you know that some groups are preparing some stuff. 1.4 million for the sellers, 1.2 million for the buyers. So if you want to get started in industry and you can do so in short order, I would say, yep, Catalyst, look into the Catalyst blueprint, look at the margins of the minerals that it costs to produce them. For 1.4 to let's say 1.3 million, you'll definitely sell your Catalyst for around that price at the moment, and yeah, you'll probably have a nice margin and a nice first step. Of course, the danger with the Tech 1 market is that it is very accessible, it is very easy to do, and so you might get flooded with oversupply on that very quickly. So this opportunity may not last very long. That is why having more and more blueprints in your library is very important if you're planning to really be serious about industry in EVE Online. But yeah, at the moment, yeah, the Catalyst is something to look into. It's just a destroyer, very accessible, cheap blueprint, very easy to produce as well. And I think that considering what's happening with the price here, you should have a decent margin. The Drake though, as you can see here, with the arms race event selling for like 40 million, yeah, 40 for the sellers, 37.6 for the buyers. So that here again is a unique situation that is probably going to rectify itself back to 45 million. The Ferox here still trading below 50 million ISK, so try to go back towards that, but it's just not happening with these low mineral prices. 47.6 for the sellers, 44.3 for the buyers. Definitely on the lower end of the scale here. That is probably due to the minerals. The Hurricane, you can see that very well here now, as you can see here from November on, lower mineral prices, and now the new average is to try and stay above 40 million ISK, where before it was trying to stay above 45 million ISK. 42.3 for the sellers, 35.6 million ISK for the buyers of the Hurricane. The Megatron suffering quite a lot from arms race as well, of course. 133 for the sellers, 123 for the buyers. But when you have these volumes of ships here, and many more I think in the hands of people, and a normal trading day nets you 40 of these Megatrons. It's probably gonna take some time to get rid of all of that. The Oracle also showing that descent as the mineral prices go lower, currently selling for 67 million, buyers are at 61 million. So that is that pressure showing up yet again. The Raven is arms race related. I'm not going to go through all of these details too much. Here the Retriever I think is speaking for itself as well. I think this increase in price here was higher titanium. I think we had higher titanium around here, but also the resource wars were introduced, and a Retriever might definitely be in interest, so delaying the fallback. But here now it's just inevitable. Start of November down through December, mineral prices keep going down, and so the Retriever goes below 20 million ISK, and the lack of buyers is not helping, I think. So this is probably a double whammy here, when people were that do want to do the resource wars now have their ships ready, have their tactics ready, demand decreases, cost decreases as well for production, price has to go down drastically towards a 1-year low point here. The Tempest arms race, of course, the Thrasher, that's also I would say a little bit interesting. It's something that you're seeing very much in high sec. It's also used to do some ganking, and here again 1 million you would expect on these low mineral prices that we would be at the lower end of this, but nope, selling for 1.1 million. Buyers are up to that 1 million. I think that you have some interest in these gang ships at the moment. The Tornado is not showing that though. That one is well below average as well below 60 million. So very cheap here. 60 million for the sellers, 54 million for the buyers. I think, yeah, well, supply, there is a decent amount if you could buy everything. Well, if you want to buy everything below 60 million, let's say, you're only talking 20 Tornadoes. That's maybe not worth it to pour the ISK into. You can wait for that to go even lower, for that supply to increase before you actually make that purchase, of course. The Tristan, pretty flat on an average range of 430,000 ISK on average. The Venture next year, I think this year, yeah, resource wars increase, and that actually remains popular. That's quite interesting. 220,000 for the sellers though. First one coming in here, 192 for the buyers. It is of course only a small Tech 1 frigate. And then the Vexor, I think, is the very embodiment of that mineral price decrease. Managed to, for some reason, be pretty strong here, up to 11 million for some time. Not so much on increased volumes, maybe a little bit, but then November again, you've got this pressure from the minerals that just cannot be stopped, and we are back below average at the moment, well below 10 million ISK here, 9.7 for the sellers, and even less than 9 million for the buyers of Vexor. So the Tech 1 market still reeling from those low mineral prices. Where is all the ISK? That's gonna be Tech 2 next, 3230. 40. There we go. Here we go. So for all those minerals that are at 1-year low points, PI that's at 1-year low points, Tech 1 ships that are very low as well, ISK must flow somewhere if we've got inflation. And of course you can see here that if trading does happen, and it is still happening in the Tech 2 market, it's at like a massive premium because of the moon mining changes. Now what is interesting here is that this has been happening since October, of course, speculation of what's going to happen with the moon mining changes through November and up to December. Managed to hold on quite nicely, and so I've said in the last few weeks, ever since this was happening, that the battle is going to be, is the balance set wrongly by CCP? Is there a lot of potential interference that is going to decrease actual moon mining supplies, or are the numbers okay, and will we eventually go back to a normal trade range? And here the Aries, I was constantly hesitating, but this is the first one that really drops off from that 35 million price range to 30 million itself. 30 million for the sellers, 28 million for the buyers. They're able to go down here, still 300 of them coming in here. Very interesting chart here. The first sign for me here that maybe we will go back to a more average trade range here of like 20 to 25 million ISK at some point, but it's still early, of course. It's the first real dip in the Aries. We'll see potentially, of course, if we see actual speculation on this dip here and we go back to 35 or even 40 million ISK, then of course that would be the entire opposite story. So very interesting one here. The Aries showing first signs of change, and we'll have to wait and see, of course, where it actually goes. Here's the Cerberus slowly trading lower as well, heading towards 250 million, but still definitely at a premium. At 250 for the sellers, 230 for the buyers. Let's see what the Claw is doing next. Peak up at 45 million, is currently selling below 35 million. Just again here trying to hold on. So this is interesting, I would say, in the sense that moon mining is introduced, trade range 35 to 40 million ISK. We go back down a little bit, currently trading at 30 to 35 million ISK. If we see another step down and then eventually another step down, I think that is still my personal preference when it comes to the two options. I think that that's what's going to happen. There is just not enough conflict at the moment, and I don't think that CCP has botched up the numbers to such an extent that we have to pay 50% more for the Tech 2 ships. I don't think that they've cut supply by 50%. So it's just a matter of getting all of that stuff going. It might be a slight premium, but not what we're seeing here. 33 million for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers of Claws at the moment. The Crow next, also dropping off from a very high point, must be said, but going to that 30 million trade range here, 29 for the sellers, even 27 for the buyers, 425 of them right here. I think it shows that production supply is alive, but that the market needs to find itself again. The Crusader next, also trying to get back below 30 million ISK. Yep, 31 for the sellers, but 26.5 for the buyers. The buyers are definitely trying to bring us back down here. 26, 25, keep that as a high point before. 20 million buy opportunities. Yep, it's still very tentative, but I think it could happen. The Heretic is showing something different, of course. 70 million trade range, and then we've got 80 as the sellers, 65, close to 60 as the buy opportunities here. There is definitely activity around the Heretic at that higher trade range. 78 for the sellers, still 57 for the buyers, very wide margin. And availability, well, it's okay actually with those 35 trades. Is a little bit lower though. The Hound here also, managing to stay at 35 million for quite a bit, but now diving down towards that 30 million, 32 for the sellers, 28.6 for the buyers, and still a decent availability here. Full front page of new Hounds coming as well. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting to see Hound, Aries, what do they do from here? Do they maintain a bit, go even lower, or do we actually see these market forces start to show up? Very interesting in my book. The Ishtar slowly going down, managing to go for less than 280 now, 267, 268 for the sellers, 252 for the buyers, also showing some pressure. Manticore, after reaching a 1-year high just around like maybe 2 weeks ago, is now at the 35 million range, and 31 for the sellers. So that's that step down. The question is this a buy opportunity for the Manticore, which has always been more expensive than the other stealth bombers, or are these the first signs that there is actually enough production to go back to a price closer to the prices before the moon mining changes? Nemesis showing that again tentatively, but going back on that 30 million trade range. 33 for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. Average is here, let's take a look at that, 31. So it's on both sides. It's not like it's only the sellers that are dictating the price here. I find that very, very interesting. Pontifex Command Destroyer still very difficult here. 130 million is 115 for the sellers, 95 for the buyers, 130 almost on the chart. 1-year high point, extremely expensive Tech 2 ship still, but the Purifier here also breaking towards that 30 million range. 32 for the sellers, 29 for the buyers. Yeah, very interesting. So the frigates, of course, you can expect them to lead the way basically, because they are smallest, easiest to produce, used in massive volumes as well. So I would say keep those frigates in mind as a bit of a barometer as what you can expect for the destroyers next, and eventually the cruisers as well, of course. But the Raptor also here, slight nick down towards 30 million. Buyers are coming in at 30, slowly trying to get that price to be a little bit lower. And then the Saber here, pretty flat around 70 million ISK. The Stiletto, let's take a look at that one. Same thing here, right? You've got some activity at around 35 million. But now here you've got this sustained move down to 30 million. Buyers coming in at 29 million, even still 45, 44 here. Coming in on the seller side at 31. I would say this is the first sign that, yeah, this is too expensive for the actual supplies that are producible with the new moon mining changes. The command destroyers though still extremely expensive here. Stork is for 90 million ISK. But finally here the Terran is also showing that sign that it wants to go down even lower. A couple of days with averages at 29 million ISK. That's the buyers winning out over the sellers. A little bit of lack of demand here. Very, very interesting. The first sign where I would say it's in general looking like we are going to look for a lower trade range for Tech 2 ships before we come back into the actual activity. And that would be very bad news for all the people that have been trading in these 2 months at this 35 million range, because anyone that's been buying here will end up holding the bag from this point out if that's materialized. I would still say it could go either way, but that's my personal expectation that, yeah, maybe we will even go back straight to this trade range of 20 to 25 million ISK. I would not be surprised by it. I'd be a little surprised by that, but I think it's still possible as well. So the Tech 2 markets still in flux for me. I'm not making moves on this one just yet because, as I've said, that is my expectation that we will eventually normalize back to our previous trade range. Next up, the Tech 3 market, 41 minutes. There we go. Let's get started with those destroyers. Interesting for the Confessor here, actually jumping back up to 60 million ISK for the sellers, 59 million actually, and 50 million for the buyers. So it's increased demand. Do we have increased volumes? A little bit, not all that noticeable. But this is definitely a jump up that has happened because people were buying them straight from the sellers. The buyers are staying at that 50 million range. And so the volatility is in the demand here. I would say that's nullsec. With Tech 2 ships being this expensive and tactical destroyers actually being really good and versatile ships, I think they're a major part of the meta at the moment. So this makes this very interesting. Look at the chart here, average price 40 million, then selling for 60 million. That's a nice 50% increase in price all of a sudden. It's something to keep in mind. It's gonna be difficult, I think, to pick him up for like close to 40 million, but you can see that here in December that we had an opportunity, in October we had an opportunity. So I would say if you're looking to do those trades that you were doing in the Tech 2 market, maybe these tactical destroyers could actually be good candidates for that. Hecate slowly going down to well below 50 million ISK, and that's going to be interesting. I would say if buyers coming in at 44.2, if they could see a similar spike because of the availability up to 55-60 million ISK, then this would make for a decent purchase at the moment. But that remains a big gamble, and the Hecate chart is not showing the same interest as the Confessor chart. So maybe the Hecate is not in the meta enough to actually do that. That one is staying flat below 50 million ISK. The Jackdaw, that's interesting. I would have expected the Jackdaw to actually show these signs as well, but it's not really doing so. It is selling for 50 million. Buyers are at 43.6 million. Availability is quite high. 43.6. Yeah, that's, you know, if at some point it would jump up to 60 million, that's quite interesting. So, okay, finally this Vapul also holding below 50 million ISK. Yeah, I would say from that perspective, if you're looking at all the ships, it's only the Confessor that is doing this. That's dangerous because the availability for Hecate, Jackdaw and Vapul is plenty for the market to stay below 50 million ISK. In general, to stay much more stable, it's only a matter of a bit of extra production or a bit of a displacement even of production to fill the gap on the Confessor. Bringing stability to that one as well. I don't think it's gonna take too much for the wormhole space industry, guys. So be careful with what I said first here. I would personally not take the gambles unless it's very clear and unless you can actually purchase these Confessors for like 40 million. Then you could decide on that, but all the others are showing way more signs of stability. Moving on to the destroyers here, the Legion, after reaching another 1 year high point of 200 million, is going back down. That's a little bit normal. 173 for the sellers, 157 for the buyers. Decent availability, but nothing too crazy. The Loki is settling at 190 to 200 million, 212 actually, 213 for the sellers, 178 for the buyers. More coming in here because of course it's the best price you can get for production of a cruiser. Proteus pretty flat here at 140. Yeah, 140 for the sellers. And finally the Tengu is pretty flat at 144. Availability quite high, availability quite high. So yeah, Legion and Loki are the two ones I think that are still doing weird stuff, right? Is it the right time to produce Lokis? Is it the right time to produce Legions? What do I want to bring to the market? Those are up and down a little bit, but will eventually, I think, stabilize each other as well. So the Tech 3 market, it is interesting, it is volatile. There's pretty big differences between the ships themselves, but I'm seeing more and more signs that we will eventually stabilize these rather than continue on this hectic path for them. And then finally for the extra product at 45.25. I'm going to take a look at the faction battleships next. We have had the cruisers, then the frigates, and now let's take a look at the battleships. Could be interesting. Browse ships, battleships, faction. Let's start with the Navy ones. Here is the Apocalypse Navy issue at a 1 year high point, currently selling for 465 million ISK. Quite expensive, very interesting. A Mar battleship, 1 year high point. Armageddon next, not that well, that's actually just basically a weird chart. If we go like this, it's also at a pretty high point, selling for 578 million ISK, and a lack of availability is clearly there compared to the demand. So Amar battleships, pretty high prices. Dominic's next here. What's that chart looking like? Man, they're so difficult at the moment. At the lower end of its average, 500 million, availability quite low as well. So it's actually a decent price, I would say. Megatron probably above its average, 445 million is a little bit more availability here. Interesting. You would think that at some point one of them would be lower than the others, but I would still say that these are average and reasonable prices for the Galantia ships as well. Kaldari, the Raven, 1 year high point as well. Raven Navy issue selling for 601 million ISK. That's quite expensive. That could also be where some of the ISK is flowing. If you know, Tech 1 battleships is so cheap, so easy. If you're looking for that upgrade, you might just be interested in the faction version. Even as an alpha clone, of course, it's gonna cost you money, but at some point, if you're like a mission runner, for instance, and you're using the Raven, at some point you're looking for that upgrade. Well, Raven Navy issue is actually a nice upgrade for that, very doable in skills as well. And so there you go, 600 million for the Raven Navy issue. Scorpion Navy issue also well above its average, I would say, 565 million ISK. So yet again at a high point. And yeah, this is really my surprise here as well. The Tempest 2 going for 515 million ISK at the high point, and the Typhoon fleet issue, same story. So across the board, Navy faction battleships are at a very high point. Seems to be lots of demand for that. My personal speculation would be the changes to alpha clones and creating very much an interest in these Navy battleships, because it means that they have something to work towards, something that's very expensive but also that works better than the very cheap Tech 1 battleships at the moment. Next up, let's take a look at the pirate battleships. Then here is the Barghest, not at a high point for the year, but definitely above average, selling for 930 million is very expensive. Also, I think maybe showcased, potentially increased demand as well in the same period. Potentially alpha clone interest. The Macariel is pretty flat, but at its high point as well. It's 564 million ISK. I think that this is basically still CCP's change in production cost that is being counted here. And again, when you think of the minerals being the exact opposite at their 1-year lows here, you have faction battleships actually being at 1-year highs. This is where lots of ISK is flowing into at the moment. The Nestor is an exception apparently, although it is also going up in price towards 450. It's probably around average at the moment. 428 for the sellers, absolutely Nestor average price here, but also a trend upwards at the tail end is visible here. The Nightmare, if we look at this entire chart, also that is at CCP intervention, currently selling for 470 million ISK on the chart. That's around here. Yeah, actually pretty expensive as well. The Balgorn is actually recovering very nicely and staying above 250 million, but is still quite affordable, 275. The Rattlesnake though, that one is very nicely going up in price. This is again a PvE battleship that becomes available to alpha clones as well. I think that that's playing a big part of what's happening here. Back up to 517 million. It is an incredible ship, of course. And then the Vindicator also slight spurt back up to 500 million, and also definitely pretty expensive at the moment. 504 million ISK for a Vindicator. So those are the faction battleships. That is another example where ISK is currently moving at the moment, and maybe also part of the reason, of course, why minerals are going so low, PI is going so low. You know, if there's just not enough destruction, not enough demand for these goods, then eventually ISK is going to flow into other stuff, and that seemed to be faction battleships, faction ships from time to time as well, Tech 2 ships for sure. Those are actually at high point. It shows that it's all connected, of course, in this sandbox economy. In my opinion, very, very interesting week here, especially I would say I quickly do want to come back on this here with the daily alpha injectors going up in price, plexus being flat. It's quite interesting. I think we can definitely use this segment as a bit of a barometer of the health of the game and the interest and the activities of alpha clones in the game as well, which here at the moment does seem to be an increased interest for skill points and thus activity for alpha clones in EVE Online at the moment. So we'll have to see, of course, if CCP comes out with actual numbers. That would be very interesting, but this is what we'll have to do with, and I would say that we will try to keep that lens, that perspective in mind when we check these numbers as well. That's going to be it for this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.